This is one of those stories that feels almost impossible. It's about how a small, swampy island became the undisputed capital of the world. It's a story packed with raw ambition, cutthroat rivalries, and these larger-than-life figures who didn't just build a city, they basically forged a new kind of power that would eventually dominate the entire globe. And it all starts with a pretty simple question.
Right. How did that actually happen? How did New York City, a place that wasn't even the first financial center in its own country, rise up to become the epicenter of global finance, culture, and influence? That's the big question we're going to unpack in this explainer.
So the story of New York's rise really begins with a fierce rivalry. For the first few decades of America's existence, the center of the financial world wasn't New York, not even close. It was another city entirely, which set the stage for a classic battle for dominance.
In the early days of the United States, all the real power and the money, it was all in Philadelphia. It was the nation's capital. It had the political connections, the big financial institutions, everything. New York was the scrappy underdog. But it had one killer advantage, and it wasn't political, it was geographic. Its harbor was a perfect gateway to the world, and it was open for business all year round, while other ports were literally frozen shut.
And you better believe New York did not waste that advantage. Within just a few years, its exports blew past Philadelphia's. But the real knockout blow, that came in 1825 with the Erie Canal. All of a sudden, New York wasn't just some coastal port anymore. It was the essential link between Europe and the entire American heartland. Goods started flowing, money followed, and within a decade, it was the nation's largest city.
By 1860, that growth had just exploded. New York's population surged to over 800,000 people. That's nearly double the size of Philadelphia. This massive flood of immigrants provided the engine, the sheer manpower for the city's booming industries.
Okay, so New York had won the trade war. The final battle was for financial supremacy. And this is where the city's unique culture, plus a little bit of clever political maneuvering, would tip the scales for good and turn Wall Street into the powerhouse we know today.
You see, this wasn't just about a better harbor, it was about culture. Philadelphia's financial scene was, kind of cautious, shaped by its Quaker roots. New York was the polar opposite, a city of immigrants and entrepreneurs just buzzing with this restless energy. And this huge appetite for risk and speculation, it created these incredibly active markets that started sucking in capital from all over the world.
But to channel all that speculative energy, New York's brokers needed some ground rules. So, back in 1792, they made them. The Buttonwood Agreement, it wasn't just some historical document, it was a promise. By setting commissions and agreeing to trade with each other first, these guys created a closed, trusted system, the New York Stock Exchange, that gave investors the confidence to pour their money in.
And then, the final piece fell into place with a major political power play. The second bank of the United States, which was Philadelphia's financial anchor, ended up in the crosshairs of President Andrew Jackson. He saw it as this corrupt monopoly, and, New York's bankers happened to agree. So when its charter was killed off in 1836, the nation's financial center of gravity shifted north for good. Wall Street had won.
With New York as the undisputed financial capital, a whole new era began, the Gilded Age. This period saw the rise of men who piled up wealth on a scale that nobody had ever seen before. Their names became legendary, but their methods kicked off a debate that honestly we're still having today.
Just look at this cartoon. It perfectly captures the growing public fear. To a lot of people, guys like John D. Rockefeller weren't captains of industry, they were monopolists. Their corporate tentacles seemed to be wrapped around every lever of power, from the government itself down to the smallest businesses. The public came up with a name for them: robber barons.
This quote from railroad tycoon Cornelius Vanderbilt tells you absolutely everything you need to know about the business culture of the time. It was bare knuckle, it was ruthless, and it was personal. These titans didn't just compete, they wanted to completely crush their rivals. The law wasn't a guide, it was just an obstacle.
And to really get your head around the sheer scale of this wealth, you have to look way beyond simple inflation. When you measure it as a share of the U.S. economy, the fortunes of these Gilded Age titans just dwarf today's billionaires. John D. Rockefeller, at his peak, was worth nearly twice as much as Elon Musk. This wasn't just wealth, it was a concentration of economic power the world had never, ever seen.
Of course, all this new wealth and power created massive political problems. Gilded Age New York was famously corrupt, run by these powerful political machines that basically fed on the very system the Titans had built. But this environment also forged one of America's most dynamic political figures.
You see, running the city back then was Tammany Hall, and this wasn't just a political party. It was an institution that controlled everything from top to bottom. It ran on a system of patronage and bribery that decided who got a job sweeping the streets and who got to sit in the mayor's office. It was the absolute definition of a political machine. So against this backdrop of total corruption, a young, energetic politician from one of New York's wealthiest families decides to jump into the ring. His name was Theodore Roosevelt. And he had this radical idea that the government should actually serve the people, not the bosses. But taking on the machine? Easier said than done. In his first run for mayor in 1886, the so-called cowboy candidate got soundly beaten, finishing a distant third. He was just crushed by the Tammany-backed winner. It was a humbling lesson in just how powerful the system he was fighting really was. Roosevelt, though, was relentless. He took the fight to corruption as a state assemblyman. Then, as New York City's police commissioner, he became famous for his midnight rambles, where he'd literally walk the streets himself to catch corrupt officers. And as governor, he went right after the powerful corporate trusts and the party bosses who protected them. Roosevelt became such a thorn in the side of the political machine that the bosses came up with what they thought was a brilliant plan. They would promote him right out of New York, exiling him to the vice presidency, a job they considered totally powerless, a political dead end. It seemed like a genius move. They'd finally gotten rid of their most troublesome reformer.
The incredible irony, of course, is that less than a year later, an assassin's bullet made Theodore Roosevelt the President of the United States. The intense conflicts of New York's Gilded Age, in business, in finance, and in politics, didn't just shape a city. They shaped a nation and a world with a legacy that we're still living with today. And the parallels to our own time are pretty hard to ignore. The first Gilded Age titans built their empires by controlling the essential infrastructure of their day: railroads, steel, and oil. Today, a new crop of titans have built their empires by controlling the infrastructure of our time: digital networks, data, and e-commerce. The playbook is strikingly similar. But the legacy of these figures is also deeply complex. Andrew Carnegie, a man who presided over violent union busting, also gave away over 90% of his fortune to build thousands of public libraries. John D. Rockefeller, the ruthless monopolist, also founded institutions that completely transformed modern medicine and higher education.
Ultimately, it was this intense crucible of competition between cities, between capitalists, between reformers and political machines that forged the modern New York. The city's identity as a place of relentless ambition, constant innovation, and global power was truly born in this Gilded Age fire.
Which leaves us with one final thought. That era of massive wealth, technological disruption, and intense political tension defined New York and America for a century. And the parallels to our own time are pretty striking. So it's worth asking ourselves, are we just watching history rhyme, or are we actually living in a new Gilded Age?